Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh, and welcome to Talking with Teachers. I'm your host, Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali. And today, once again, we have a very special guest. For the past 20 years, Ustadha Hosai Mojaddidi has served the Muslim community in the greater Bay Area and Orange County, LA areas as an organizer, teacher, spiritual counselor, mentor, and mental health advocate. She started studies with Shaykh Hamza Yusuf back in 1996 at the Islamic Studies School in Hayward. Her efforts have been aimed to create a strong sisterhood for Muslim women through spiritual study circles, support groups, spiritual counseling, mentoring, and couples spiritual therapy. In 2010, she collaborated with Dr. Nafisa Secondary, a fellow Bay Area native, clinical psychologist, and close family member, which led to the launch of the mentalhealthformuslims.com website. Sister Ustadha Hosai is very well known here in the Bay. And of course, a lot of people know her online, have great respect for her. So it really gives me great pleasure to bring her to the screen and have this conversation. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Dr. Abdullah. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, really a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to you, and also give the audience an opportunity to learn more about you, because as we know, it's like talking with teachers is about talking about topics, but in particular, the most important of topics, at least for me at the moment, is the actual guest. Who is the guest, and what happened in your life to which led you to where you are today, which is typically the starting question that I have for everyone is, sort of ask you to talk a bit about how things were growing up. How did you come to do the work that you do? What was family life like growing up, and where did that start? How did it start, etc. Those type of things. Whatever you like to share. Bismillah.
Sure. First of all, Jazakumullah khairan. Again, it's an incredible honor to be here with you. Alhamdulillah. I've watched several of your episodes and I've always been fascinated, and you've brought so many wonderful speakers. So I've learned a lot. And again, it's an honor to be with you. So Jazakumullah khairan. About my personal background. So Alhamdulillah, I like many people who were born in Afghanistan am now part of the diaspora. We came right around the beginning, tail end of the 70s, 79, beginning of the 80s. My father, alhamdulillah, was able to, get us out safely. We went to Pakistan for, I think, a few months, waiting for our refugee status to be finalized so that we could move here to the States. And then we were we went to the Washington, D.C. area. So that's where that's where I grew up. And I was there for most of my childhood that I can remember, because I was very young. I think I was about 2 when we left. So I don't really I have very vague memories of Afghanistan. And I don't even know if they're real. Sometimes you hear stories. So I'm like, I don't know if they're my memories, core memories, but I just kind of vaguely know certain things. But yeah, alhamdulillah, most of my childhood up until I was 9 was in the Washington, D.C. metro area. We lived in Woodbridge, Virginia, and then Crestview, Virginia. So alhamdulillah. And my siblings, I have 4 siblings, 5 altogether. An older sister, older brother, another older sister, myself, and then a younger brother. So I'm 4th in line. So we came in, alhamdulillah, at that time, because so many of my family members were also being processed. My dad, mashallah, was, Allah yarhamhu, he passed away in 2015. He actually was educated in England, so he spoke English, as much as he could. He got by, so he was able to actually do a lot of the processing for many family members. So alhamdulillah, we eventually had so many different cousins coming in. I remember one of my memories of my childhood in Virginia is that we had rented a home with several of my aunts and uncles, and we all lived in that home, and it was a white house. And so when we told people that we lived in DC at the White House, we kind of chuckled about it, but I think for us as children, it was something that we did kind of, I mean, we mentioned it to family members as a way of, kind of making ourselves feel very important, that we lived in a White House, and in DC. But it was a very small rental home, and we were crammed in there. There were so many families, mashallah. But those are our humble beginnings, alhamdulillah. And then eventually, we went on and separated. But that was the starting point. And then by the time I was 9, there were enclaves of Afghanis kind of being formed that my father got wind of. Like there were people kind of coming together to create, and DC definitely had that, so that's why we went there first. But it wasn't as, they were kind of spread out. But then there was this sort of move here to the Bay Area that my uncle and aunt had made, and then several other people that he knew. So there was kind of like, maybe we should go explore this place called California, since there's so many Afghanis that are coming here as well. And I don't know, again, when you arrived, but Fremont, which is very close to where we are here, had the title of being called Little Kabul, because it was such a, there were so many Afghans moving there. So I think my parents, having known family and friends who had came, and they had just so many great things to say about that you actually feel like you're part of a community again, having been displaced. So they felt, maybe it's time for us to make the trek. So we came out here, and we settled not in Fremont, we settled in Concord, which is pretty close by. So I did my junior high school, and then middle school, and then high school in the Concord area.
Mashallah. Yeah, so it sounds like you're pretty much just an American.
Absolutely. Although when people, see me, they still expect me to have a thick accent, and sometimes I play along, but no, I am definitely.
Yeah. So it's actually, we moved here to the Bay Area in 2007 from the East Coast. So it's actually fascinating. What I'd noticed very early on once we moved here, that so many people we knew actually used to live on the East Coast, and so they moved to the Bay Area. And the common sort of a statement that people used to make quite often was that that if you leave the Bay Area, it's not because you want to, it's because you have to. And the other one, and there's another thing that people would say about the Bay Area. It slips my mind at the moment, but it was really, we moved here and we really loved it. Of course, the Bay has very good weather. The scenery is beautiful. Of course, there's some problems with with the politics in certain places from time to time, but you can largely escape it, or insulate yourself from it in different ways. But the first, actually, I came to the Bay back in 2000. I was in Morocco, and so Zaytuna actually flew me from Morocco to Zaytuna. There was a Deen intensive happening. Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayer was here. Dr. Tawfiq al-Bulti was here as well. And I think it was Imam Zay's idea, so I didn't know at the time that they were sort of recruiting me to come on board, going way back then. So they needed help with some translation, so I did attempt to translate the halaqat, or the durus of Dr. Tawfiq al-Bulti on sort of fiqh, but I think I got a lot of it. It's kind of a challenge to translate such a difficult topic, especially after so many years not being able to have the opportunity to translate sort of on the spot or extemporaneously like that. And then also because my English had been suffering, because I had been in Morocco for such a long time that I found myself speaking Arabic most of the time than speaking English.
Really?
So
Wow.
But anyway, it's supposed to be about you.
No, I'm actually fascinated by your story. I'd love to hear more, honestly, especially because I realized that you came when I left. So I'm actually really saddened. I think that was probably one of the only Deen intensives that I did not attend, or I couldn't attend because I had just had I was expecting. So I was expecting my first child. And but I left in 2000, the beginning actually of 2007. So I'm wondering if we just completely missed each other, because it was May.
So you left. You went where did you go to after that? You left.
So subhanAllah, I ended up. My husband is from Southern California, so I actually moved there, and To your point earlier about, once you leave the Bay, it's like it's not by choice, right?
Yeah.
I mean, alhamdulillah, of course I wanted to be with him, but we were only supposed to be in Southern
Mhm.
California for 2 years. And then
Mhm.
like that was kind of the promise that we would come back, because
Mhm.
I was like, my family, my roots, obviously Zaytuna, a lot of the things that I had known and come to love were here. But my husband, alhamdulillah, work life happens. And so we ended up staying there for 9 years.
Oh, okay.
That was,
Okay.
yeah, long absence. But I would
Right.
come up periodically just to visit my parents, Allah
Right. Right.
and then also attend a lot of these Zaytuna events. I think I only missed maybe 1 or 2 graduations. So
Mhm.
alhamdulillah, I was still very connected, and thank God, because the flights are just like an hour. So
Yeah, I know, totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just actually just remembered the other thing that people would say about the Bay. They would say that if you're in the Bay, that everyone has a hustle, right? You have to have a hustle. You have your regular job, but you also have a hustle in order to survive, right? For most
yeah.
people, right? Right. So,
That's true.
and
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Life here is not, I mean, it's very, mashallah, as you said, the weather's beautiful, the
mm,
community's beautiful, the
mm,
diversity,
mm,
but there is a grind here that you got to participate in order
yeah.
to survive. So
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is like one thing I noticed as years went by that there were all these people in the Bay Area with the last name Mojaddidi.
yes,
I said, similar. This is a tribe, So when you talk about Fremont being sort of little Kabul,
yes.
and it's like, okay, well, yeah, there's Faridun Mojaddidi, there's Omar Fahim Mojaddidi, because there's Hosai Mojaddidi, and more and more of these people. And I say, okay, well, it sounds like there's something's going on here. There's like this tribe that's moved in. So I mean, I imagine that you are related to most of the Mujaddidis in some one
Alhamdulillah.
particular form or another. Yeah.
Yes, and subhanAllah, it's such a large family, Dr. Abdullah. Like, I don't
Yeah.
even know more than half of them. I don't, and I meet people all the time, and they're like, "Oh, do you know so and so Mojaddidi?" I'm like, possibly. I'm not sure. I'm sure we're related somehow, but we
Yeah.
are related. And then it doesn't help that we also all
Mm.
spell our last names differently. That's
Yes.
actually very confusing for a lot of people,
Yeah.
because there's like double D's and Y's and E's, and it's all over the place. So
Mm.
it's yeah, but alhamdulillah, we actually did. There were so many more of us here
Mhm.
when we first moved to the
Mhm.
area, and then now we've dispersed. So you'll find
Mm.
pockets here and there, but not as much as if you had come in the 80s and 90s. We were running the show. We really were.
Yeah. Well, actually, I met Freydon when I visited in 2000 when he had his I forgot where his bookstore was at the time where
It
we
was
were
in Fremont, probably, right? The same
okay.
location. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't remember if it's the same location or not, but I just do remember that I had met him, and he showed me an old picture of me when I was really, really skinny back then.
Oh wow,
He had a
subhanallah.
picture, right? So, yeah, and I interviewed him as well. So, mashallah, it's a nice memories. And yeah, the issue with the different spelling of the names is interesting too. Because same thing with my wife's family.
Mm-hmm.
She has a lot of relatives online too, and they have the same last name, Boutqiq, and different, members of the family, they spell it in a different way, at least in English, or what they would be, for them would be French, the way they spell it in French.
Right, the
So,
French.
using Latin letters. But yeah, that's really, really interesting. So
Yeah.
growing up, yeah, I'm assuming that there, well, I mean, how religious would you say your family was as you
Mm.
were growing up?
So yeah, alhamdulillah, because the Mujahidi family, as you know, it does have a religious lineage. We do have that, and many of my uncles and people throughout like that we my childhood that I remember, they definitely I really. I associated them always with the faith more so than the culture. They were very the way that they dressed. It was different, right? Because if you've seen the Afghan community, you see, mashallah, a lot of people assimilating. But our family uniquely always had a certain presence in the way that we gathered. So even at our weddings or any family gatherings, there was definitely a religious significance that was present. But our specific family, I would say we were culturally Muslim. So, we definitely participated in the holidays. Eid, Ramadan was very significant growing up. I mean, as young children, we started fasting very early, and it was always expected of us to fast. Although prayers were not forced in any way, we were encouraged to pray, but it wasn't something that I would say I mean, my grandfather, Allah yarhamu, he was our first teacher. He taught us, the fiqh of prayer and how to do everything. But in terms of my parents, I think they would probably be better defined as culturally Muslim. And so, making sure that the rules of, gender interactions were definitely very much in line with the faith. But other than that, we were allowed to have music. We were kind of, allowed to be, American in that way.
Right. But conservative in the most important areas,
Yes.
and a little bit more loose in the less.
Exactly.
I guess you're there. Yeah, I guess in some ways I had a similar, but perhaps a bit more liberal upbringing, like that. My parents, of course, they're converts to Islam as well. And but I typically tell people when they say, okay, well, were you raised Muslims? I say, well,
yeah, exactly.
kind of, yeah,
It was there. It was always in the periphery. That's how I kind of see it, Islam. It was always there, but it wasn't in the forefront. We were very Afghan. And I know sometimes it's hard to, as a child anyway, distinguish what's what. But I think after, growing up and realizing like, yeah, that was more the culture that was taught as opposed to anything religious. Yeah.
Yeah. Because even for us, we found ourselves involved with a lot of the American cultural celebrations as well. Like 4th of July was it's really special day for us. I mean, we always knew it was a holiday because there was watermelon at home. My dad would buy watermelon because it has to be a holiday. It's watermelon. Right. 4th of July, of course, Christmas. Even Easter, like, they shoot the Easter eggs and the Easter bunny and things like that, getting eggs and coloring them and those type of things, so it's just, so we in that way, we're a lot like the normal American kids, I guess you would say, or non-Muslim, we're non-Muslim American kids. And so really didn't know a lot about Islam coming up. We knew we are Muslims, God's name is Allah. Right. But yeah,
you were taught like the foundation, but and I had a very similar experience. 4th of July was huge for us because we were in DC, and that was like our favorite holiday. Like the fireworks were spectacular. We would gather by the Lincoln Memorial, so it was such a big day for our friends and family that were there, and we loved it. And when I moved here, it was actually one of the saddest things because it doesn't compare. You can't have a 4th of July compared to what you get in the DC area. So that was definitely, and then also because we were part of all these refugee programs. I remember it was a little odd getting gifts during Christmas because they were, trying to assimilate us and get us, to feel comfortable. So they would offer us as children gifts, and we were like, oh, we're getting Christmas gifts. So there was definitely some a bit of, American culture that was very much in our upbringing as well.
Yeah. Halloween was another one.
Oh, Halloween.
Yeah. Exactly. So, So why don't you tell me about your studies? I mean, so how did that start? When did it start?
Sure.
And then of course your path to eventually meeting Shaykh Hamza, etc. I've heard something about that in the past. It's really, I like
about my meeting. I actually wondered if you knew about how I met Shaykh Hamza. SubhanAllah. So I can look back. I think like when I think back about how I came to start to practice Islam. As we've covered, I was born into a Muslim family, but I didn't come to the realization of my own belief. I guess it wasn't awakened until I was in high school, and we actually had a speaker through the MSA of our high school come out to speak to us right around the time, and you may remember this, when the autobiography of Malcolm X, the movie, came out.
Yes.
So remember, that was such a big deal, that film. And so I didn't know who Malcolm X was. I had no idea about any of this stuff. So the speaker was, you may also know him, Amir Abdul Malik Ali. He's in Oakland. So he, mashallah, was fantastic. I mean, he was probably the first, in my recollection, like American, real, like Muslim authority figure that I remember listening to and suddenly feeling something was happening, stirring within me, because all of the people that I had been exposed to up at that point were immigrants. They had thick accents, and I just felt very like I didn't relate to them, even though they were, maybe shared culture and obviously faith. But he was the first person, the way he spoke and just his energy, his love for Islam really ignited something within me. And I remember him talking specifically about the book itself and the story. I was like, wow, I need to know about this person named Malcolm X. So I remember, subhanAllah, going to the library that day, literally, and checking out the autobiography of Malcolm X. And that was probably, I mean, I had read, literature and for school and for grades, but that was probably the first book that I had ever checked out just to read cover to cover out of interest for myself, because we just weren't born, raised in a family of readers like that. The television was on a lot, but I didn't really read very much other than for school assignments. But I was so inspired by what he had shared. And then the movie was coming out, so I was like, I need to know more. And I remember that definitely made me, like I said, waken up to who I am as a Muslim. And it was like the first seed that was planted. And then, ironically, fast forward, this was in high school when I went to, I actually ended up staying after high school close by, because my mother, I had my three elder siblings, they had gone on to college, and that caused a lot of stress for my mom, and she ended up getting sick. And so I decided to stay and attend junior college here in the Bay, just to be with her. And so there I, because of, just my social skills, some of the Muslims had asked me to actually be the president of the MSA, because I was kind of outgoing and I guess I could speak. So they said, you should just take that position. But even though outwardly I wasn't a fully practicing Muslim, I said, okay, sure, if no one else is going to do it. So I kind of stepped into that role. And we had a really interesting event that happened where the one of the faculty members actually asked myself, as the president of the MSA, if I could gather the MSA to come in support of an event that she was hosting, where she was inviting a Muslim speaker from Africa to come and talk about her life. And she's like, it would be really great if the Muslim Student Association showed up. So I was like, sure. So, I was looking at, I gathered as many of the members that I could. And we had a pretty good MSA. And I said, it's important for us to show up and to attend and help support this cause. So we ended up going there. And unfortunately, though, we didn't know that the speaker actually was someone who had left Islam. She was there to talk about FGM, female genital mutilation, and her experiences with that. And so the conversation turned so different than everything we were presented. And we ended up sitting in the audience completely dumbfounded and shocked, because she unfortunately used her position to actually disparage, Islam, and talk really terribly about the Prophet ﷺ specifically. So it ended up being so opposite of everything we anticipated, that there was not an altercation per se, but there was definitely an exchange that happened with some of the members of the MSA and her, because we were like, this is wrong. She's completely, misrepresenting our faith. So alhamdulillah, I kind of took the lead on that, in that during the Q&A, I asked for the microphone, and I called her out, because I felt very responsible for gathering. I mean, we were probably about 20 or 30 people dispersed in the audience. And I was like, she's insulting us, and we're here to support her. So I just felt like people needed to know that she was misrepresenting our faith. So I did speak out against her. And when I did that, I think the reaction I got from not only her, but from the audience, and this was a packed hall. These were a lot of like women's studies, majors, and people who were there, in support of, maybe feminism and other ideas like that, movements. So there was definitely an energy in the room. And when they heard me, and quote unquote insulting their speaker, they were really angry. And so it was kind of like a mob reaction that I got, turning around and booing. And I just was stunned at, their reaction toward me. And it definitely, again, but though maybe it's my Afghani hot-bloodedness, I wasn't done. They shut my mic off, but I was pretty upset that they were still going. And she made some snarky remark after I did that. They cut my mic off. And then alhamdulillah, I had a friend, she also has passed on, Allah yarhamha. Her name was Heba, but Heba was Egyptian, and she had these big curls, like blonde kind of spiral curls. So she looked very non-brown, I guess you could say. She almost looked like she was, Caucasian. So she was sitting a few seats down from me. Nobody would have suspected that we were friends, or that that she was Muslim. But I had asked her, I said, can you just raise your hand? Because they're not going to give myself. There were some hijabis, maybe 2 or 3, who raised their hands. They were not going to give us any more of the mic, right? Because it was we were distracting or whatever their agenda. So when I asked Heba to get the mic, then she tossed it to me, and it was round
Like
2.
they do in Congress sometimes, it's like they call a witness and then they sort of filibuster,
That's
or not the
right.
filibuster, but basically the congressperson may like just talk over the person, just give the speech
Yes.
and doesn't give the witness an
Yeah, it doesn't
opportunity
give the
to say
mic
anything.
back. Yeah.
Right. And then when the next person comes, okay, hey, would you like to like to
Yeah,
say
I
anything?
yield
Right.
my time too.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right there,
So
right. Yes. That's
yeah,
cool.
subhanAllah. So that's what happened. And I just ended up going again round 2. And I just was like, this is so insulting. And you need to stop. What you're saying is wrong. And subhanAllah, at that point, it got so bad, the audience reaction, that they actually, and I think it's from Allah, they actually had to shut down the whole event for security reasons. So I was like, well, that's
For
fine.
security reasons. Okay.
People were getting out of their
Yeah.
chairs. It's like an auditorium, and they were like jumping over to try to come and attack us. It got really bad. Alhamdulillah, no, it didn't turn violent, but I think they were so scared that it could. And I just well, if it meant, because she was really saying horrible things. I mean, she was completely insulting the Prophet ﷺ. She was saying terrible things about Muslims in Islam. So I felt like, we can't sit there. First of all, we
Right,
can't just
right.
let her continue. So alhamdulillah, it ended up that but that was such a huge moment in my life, because I realized these people turned toward me, and I was the other, but nobody would know that I was the other, because my behavior, my dress, nothing was different. I look just like any of them in a sense of, the way I'm presenting myself. So I really had a lot of soul searching to do about who am I, what are my beliefs, and how do I want to be, known, or do I, like just that those existential questions, like what am I doing, who am I, and why haven't I, if I feel so strongly, because I felt so strongly about what I was saying, then why isn't it showing, and that kind of led me down
Okay.
a real path of exploration of
Yeah,
Islam.
mashallah. Right. So then eventually you meet Sheikh Hamza. No,
Yeah,
I wanted to pause for a second. So I wanted to
sure.
just make a couple points, because I'm reflecting upon everything you just said, and
Mhm.
I wanted to start at the issue regarding reading, like books
Right.
and your interests, and I know so many Muslims will have a similar story, and I'm one of those people like that as well. Even though I went to a motivation school and supposed to be, kind of the smart kid type of stuff, right? That I really didn't have much of an interest in reading books other than when I was in school, right?
Right.
Assigned readings, but when it came to Islam, I just developed like just this really strong passion for reading. I just really this interest, that I developed. And I know so many other people like that. I know that there's an elderly individual who's an old friend, but of course he's like an uncle or like a father
Mhm.
figure who passed away about 2 years ago, Brother Ali Subhan, rahimahullah, on the East Coast. And he only made it to the 8th grade.
Wow.
He only made it to the 8th grade, but he was Muslim, became Muslim, and then eventually he started to read. He learned Arabic, all these things, and he went to University of Medina. But he was really an avid reader of Islamic, books, Arabic books, and another individual I know, he only made it to the 3rd grade, but if you meet that brother today, I'm not gonna say his name because
Mhm.
he told me not to, tell people that this was the case, but if you met this brother, he, you would never know that
Wow.
that he only made it to the 3rd grade when he was younger. So, um, but yeah, so many people have like a similar study, like, and I also used to work in a prison as well, right? So
Mhm.
same thing with a lot of the brothers who become Muslim in prison. It's like they
Right.
didn't read at all, but then all of a sudden they become Muslim. And to me, I see it as a hallmark of Islam, but also a sign of like it's like the miracle of Islam too, right?
Um,
That becoming a Muslim actually makes you a reader. It makes you interested in reading, right? And I'm
Subhanallah.
not totally sure if other religions have that same effect on people, right? But it's
Right. Well,
just
the
one of
first
those things that,
command, right?
yeah,
Iqra. I mean,
yeah,
it's so amazing. No, and I,
mm,
subhanAllah,
yeah,
I agree. My passion for reading was not
mm,
sparked until
mm,
I started looking into Islam, and I think maybe it was that draw to the truth, that was that sparked that interest. Because yeah, leisurely reading or reading like novels and fiction just never even now has never interested me. I'm like, why would I waste my time? But if it's
yeah,
something from our tradition, I'm always like devouring it. And we have, I mean, I'm sure you feel the same. I have libraries of books that I love to collect, and I
yeah.
just can't wait for the time to be able to read
Mm.
them all. So I agree,
Yeah. Yeah.
subhanAllah.
Yeah. And a lot of my friends, they used to read the newspaper all the time, and mostly the sports section. They were really interested in the sports section. I never developed this sort of desire to read the newspaper. I mean, I
Right.
always felt like I was missing something at the same time, but I just didn't have the interest in it, but knowing what I know now, I'm glad that I never developed
Right.
the sort of the habit of reading newspapers, but yeah, I
Exactly.
just thought that was really a good, an important point to just to express myself
Absolutely.
about about that particular topic, but yeah, but again, like I said, you eventually you said 1996 you meet Sheikh Hamza, but of course
Yeah.
you want you to tell the story.
Yeah, the way that I met Sheikh Hamza, alhamdulillah, was very interesting. So I had, kind of because of the MSA, eventually I went on after that incident that happened, and I did start to practice my faith more seriously. I wore hijab, I started to pray, and I just started taking in whatever knowledge I could. And what was at my what was available to me at that time was whatever the was being sent through the national MSA to the school. They would send every year these boxes of just material, and so I remember devouring all those books, and I learned. But it was definitely a certain particular viewpoint of Islam that I took on, and I didn't know that there were that there was different manhaj. I didn't have any of that background at all, but I definitely got caught up and swept away in this what I would call political Islam. And so, I ended up, we were college students. So, that zeal that comes with that age. I was doing a lot of halaqas. I was doing a lot of activist stuff, protests, all of that stuff was happening. And even though I was, at the junior college, I ended up, because of just my friend circle, having friends in different schools. So at UC Berkeley, at UC Davis, I was active up there. I would just make friends. And then we ended up doing halaqas. So the halaqas that I was doing at UC Berkeley, they were weekly. And so one day I came up to the home where we would convene, and I see some of the sisters who were supposed to come to the halaqa, they were leaving somewhere. So I was like, hey, where are you guys going? Aren't you going to come for the halaqa? And they said, actually, today we're going to go to the Hayward. There's this teacher who's going to start doing classes there, and we want to go check it out. So of course, that piqued my interest. So I said, oh, who's the teacher? And then they said a name that I was familiar with. And as soon as they said it, Imam Hamza Yusuf, I was like, oh, okay. So my alarm bells went off, because I had heard his name in the circles that I was listening to as being someone that we should be wary of and warn people of. So I was, because of my zeal and my overconfidence and arrogance, I was like, you know what, I'm going to come too. So I was really like on a mission at that point that I needed to go and find, just for myself, meet this guy, because he had been warned about him. So I followed them, and we drove from Berkeley all the way to this little, it was right off of Mission, where we had the Islamic Studies School. Well, that's where it was, the classes were held. And so we followed them there, and I go inside, and it's a very small building or room, office building. And I remember being absolutely shocked, first of all, because I had never seen that large segment of Muslims, kind of like me, young, college students. I could just tell, like, they were around my age, or around the same age, and they were all they were separated, so we had a huge a divider basically between the men and the women, but you had to walk through so you could see just how large of a group that was, and they were crammed in this small place. And then Sheikh Hamza was at the beginning, was at the front of the room, and he was teaching, and I just happened to come during, I think, the middle of a Sira session that he was doing. And so I, very, again, with my agenda, I was like, oh, I'm going to go in, and if I'll call him out, or I didn't even know what I was going to do, but I definitely had a plan that I was going to confront this man that I had been warned about, because he's misguiding people, and all this stuff, all nonsense. So I sat, and I remember just completely being, I don't know, again, it's just another transformation that's happening, because he's in the middle of Sirah, and he's describing things I had never heard before. And especially, again, the same maybe effect that Imam Abdul Malik had, which was, he was white, English native speaker, no accent, totally young, very relatable, speaking about things that he took me to a different world, in the way that he was relating the seerah, and the tears, like because Shaykh Hamza, even to this day, as he sometimes may get in the moment, emotional, but he was
choked up,
choked up totally. And I'd never seen a man do that. I'd never seen anybody talk about the Prophet in that way. So it was very transformative. And I just remember feeling so overwhelmed. My heart was just, doing, jumping jacks or flips, but I started to weep, because I was being so affected by this story. And then I resolved by the end of that this, that I needed to know more about him, not for my initial reasons, but whatever people were saying about him were false, because there's no way that, you can hear what he had transmitted that day and not walk away with that feeling of, like that. I think I remember which Sahaba it was, but one of the Sahaba who, when they saw the Prophet ﷺ, and they made that statement, like, that is not the face of a liar, right? And that's how I kind of felt, like, he's a truthful person. Like, I can tell, because his energy and his ability to convey the seerah was so powerful and so moving that I just felt so, my conviction was very like ilm al-yaqeen in that sense.
As the saying goes, that what comes from the hearts reaches the hearts.
Yes.
So
Perfect.
And I mean, life has so many lessons, right?
Absolutely. No, I had a conversion. I really feel like it was a conversion moment for me. And then, when I many years later, told Sheikh Hamza that story, he just laughed immediately, because he was thinking of it from the context of my lineage. He said, "Oh, so you had like a Omar moment." And I said, "The Omar moment." And I was like, "Oh, I never thought of it that way." But sure. So, and it was, because I came with hostility. I came with all that subhanAllah, but by the end of it, it was totally subhanAllah.
SubhanAllah. Allah bless you. Allah bless him. Bless the Sheikh. Yes. When I worked in the prison, most of the brothers, they actually identified as being Salafi. So I like to tell people like that that particular job was probably a really like a major turning point in my own ethical and ethical development and my maturity, right? It was a job that I really didn't want at first, but then I embraced it. I had a different perspective about Muslims who were incarcerated prior to starting that job, and then I had to develop a much more positive sort of attitude about it. But at any rate, a lot of the brothers, I was being demonized by the more learned brothers who were Salafis in that particular prison. So every time new brothers would come in, they would like talk, on the block, and they would say things about me and say he believes this, he believes that, and so every time Jummah, they would announce Jummah, I would always see them rushing down to the chapel every single Friday, because my office is right. I could see them coming down, and they go inside the chapel. These guys are really excited to hear what I had to say, because they were waiting to hear something crazy. So I would, and my khutbah was always like an ayah. Hadith. It's Quran and Sunnah. That's all I would give them the simple stuff, the easy stuff. And so after 3-4 months would go by and they didn't hear anything crazy, and the guys would say, "Well, okay, I've been waiting for him to say something crazy. All he said is Quran and Sunnah, right?" So something I was able to win a lot of them over that way. But it's really, it's one of those unfortunate things, when people get sort of steeped in ideology and sectarianism. And we all have to mature, we go through different phases, and, man, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to wake us up, right? So sorry to take us off that, but
no, actually, I'm curious about your story, Dr. Abdullah. Was this after you had studied, you came back and you were working? Okay, mashallah. And it was here, like, or on the East Coast?
It was on the East Coast, right? East Coast, right? Yeah. So I came back I graduated from the Qarabiyin in 2001.
MashaAllah.
So I came home about a month and a half right before 9/11.
I see.
Right. So it was like really like a big deal. Imam Zayd graduated the same year. Imam Zayd actually, his library, he actually brought his entire library and dumped it in my apartment in Morocco for the last year, from 2020, 2001. And so he came to Morocco to memorize the Quran. And then he would go back. Flew back to Syria during the exam time. Right. So, but I had his entire library, so we graduated in that same year. He finished, there. Abinor, and then I was finishing Qarabiyin. So anyway, so maybe a year later is when I started the job in the prison.
I see.
So this is all on the East Coast, and I actually met Sheikh Hamza first time in 1998. Right, actually, it was during my second year at Al Qarabiyin. It was there. I heard that these Americans were coming to study at in the summer at the masjid itself at the school. So it's a dean intensive program, and when I arrived, I discovered that okay, well, all the Moroccans decided that okay, no, only the ulama of Morocco can teach in Al Qarabiyin, right? So he told Sheikh Hamza and everyone else. I think it's Sheikh Jamal Dhahabi was there, Sheikh Ibrahim OCFA was there, and a number of people were there. So they told all the teachers, no, you all translate. We're going to give you our teachers, and you translate for the students, right? So Moroccans took over the entire program, and of course they provided the housing and food and things like that. So Sheikh Hamza, he found that I was there studying, so he had asked me, "Hey, could you come down and help us out, right, with the translation?" So
amazing.
And it's sort of yeah.
I think it was the first. It was one of the first rihlas, right? That was done in Morocco, I think.
Yeah. It was the very first. It was the very first one.
First one. Okay,
right.
mashallah.
A number of people there. Tariq Masidi was there.
Yeah.
Shadia Masri was there. There were a number of people, who actually are now, they have their own sort of organizations, who actually were they attended that particular rihla in Morocco. So
I remember hearing about it over the years, and I think I just some of our friends may have attended that as well. SubhanAllah here, but I was one of the ones again that I didn't go to the Morocco one. I didn't go to Spain, so I missed a lot of those earlier ones. But then, alhamdulillah, they started bringing them here.
Right. So that's kind of like that's I first met him back then, and then of course I knew Imam Zaid a little bit longer than that, but not really. I got to know Imam Zaid a little bit more during my time in Morocco than I had known him prior to that. I've already been a fan of Imam Zaid's before I went to study. And of course, I was a fan of Sheikh Hamza's before I went to study as well. And so I just happened to meet him then, and so alhamdulillah, it's really interesting that things work out. Things work out.
It's amazing how we've crossed paths, and then subhanAllah, look where we all are now. It's amazing.
Right. So alhamdulillah. So with Sheikh Hamza, where did you study? What you said you studied over those years?
Yeah, so alhamdulillah, when we first, the classes that he gave in those first years, purification of the heart, he did the seerah, of course, of the Prophet ﷺ. That was completely, that may have been the first class I attended for sure, but the first complete sort of series that we did, because I continued. He was doing them weekly, mashallah. Every week we would come for those hours we just spent, subhanallah. And then, eventually he would bring on other scholars to come and teach us, alhamdulillah, fiqh, Hanifi fiqh. And then Sheikh Muhammad, Al-Yaqubi came, alhamdulillah. And that was completely life-changing for me as well, myself and some of the other teachers. We had some of the private Islamic schools kind of starting just around that time. And so when Sheikh Muhammad came, his wife, Fariza, Allah yarhamha, we befriended her, and she, was shocked when she found out that a lot of us who were teaching these little kids, that we didn't know tajweed, we didn't have any knowledge of how to read the Book of Allah. So she was shocked. She was like, "Oh my God, how can you be teaching and you don't have this?" So she actually, alhamdulillah, went out of her way and asked Sheikh Muhammad if he would teach some of us tajweed, just do a private class with us. And so that was completely life transforming, because I had prior to that I always feel like when I explain my journey with the Quran specifically that I had struggles, because it's kind of like a form of dyslexia. I don't know how else to describe it, but I would have a problem with letter recognition and just switching, and it would be very challenging. So I tried, to do memorization. I tried to do different things, and I went through several teachers, but I always had that challenge. And it wasn't until subhanAllah, Shaykh Muhammad came, he gave us 1 month. It was an intensive. It was like a proper tajweed intensive. And he went through all the rules, and he, alhamdulillah, by the end of it, I completely could read fluently. And it was like a miracle, because I had spent years trying. So that was an amazing class. And then we ended up doing like Sisters Dean Intensive. So there was a lot of work with female resident scholars as well who were coming and traveling. So yeah, it's just so many different subjects, Arabic, things that were offered. We just, we were like sponges. We were so, and it really feels like I'm talking about a different time. I mean, it was a different time, but a different like era that's unfortunately I just don't, it's missing now in terms of that. There was, and I think the internet and just everything's been completely altered, as you know. But then it was like these classes were they were the center of our lives. We couldn't wait for any program to be announced because it was the thing to be a part of, and that I think that sense of community that was built.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I was gonna ask you. You know Arabic, right?
Alhamdulillah, so my background with Arabic is interesting because I studied in Jordan for a very short amount of time. And I have a lot of friends who are so I can pick up a lot, alhamdulillah, I can understand. But I think because I didn't formally study Arabic in terms of like finishing anything, and it's something that I do hope to do in my lifetime. I mean, I have a lot of books and I have all of that, but I think taking a class, it's always been something on my radar. And I'm hoping that with my kids as they advance forward, that I can do that as well, inshallah.
Well, I'm quite sure. I mean, you know a lot more than you make it seem like, but inshallah, Allah bless you to increase your knowledge and understanding of everything, like all of us. I remember, like, I talked to Sheikh Hamza quite a bit, so I think it was maybe 2 years ago when he asked you to do something for Zaytuna. I forgot what particular lecture that was. It was sort of a fundraising. I think it was a 2-part thing. I did one part, you did another part of it, right? I forgot what it was called. I think maybe something related to family, and so and I had never heard you speak before that particular moment, so I watched your video and I called Sheikh Hamza. I said, Sheikh Hamza, I said, I didn't know that Hosai, was so eloquent and so articulate, and she really, I mean, of course, I mean, it's like that she actually, in your Arabic pronunciation and everything, you're quoting hadith, and he was like, no, yes, she's, Sheikh Hamza is like, you can't, she's done very well for herself. So, and I was actually, again, not to, I stuck for the law. I asked her Allah's forgiveness for, I guess you would say, perhaps maybe, I thought a little bit, less of you than I actually did at that moment, right? So, and because it's my sin, I asked Allah's forgiveness for it. But alhamdulillah, it was really nice to finally hear you speak and present, and because I was like, well, Sheikh Hamza is asking her to present something. I guess he has to know something, right? Sheikh Hamza is asking her to represent Zaytuna.
That's such a compliment coming from you, Dr. Abdullah. I admire you so much. Jazakallah khair. And honestly, to have any feedback from you like that is I mean, it's very humbling, and I don't deserve that. But Jazakumullah khairan. Alhamdulillah, we're all on a journey, as you said, and I feel like that's the beauty of being amongst giants and scholars like yourself, is you're always inspired to keep going and to keep improving, inshallah. So your du'as are so I appreciate it. Jazakallah khairan.
Yeah, inshallah. Now earlier you spoke about that lecturer who came to that institution who wanted to talk about female mutilation, right?
Yes.
Now it's interesting that feminism has come, right, over these years, over these decades, right, since whenever we want to say it began, because somebody goes all the way back to the end of the 1800s, and then of course it evolved the different waves of feminism, that we know. And so then a woman comes and she talks about how bad Islam supposedly is because of FGM, and it's like, well, Islam, that's not Islam for one, but then it's like, well, what about transgenderism? What about, the surgeries, transgender surgeries? Right? Isn't that like genital mutilation as well? And you're trying to, impose it upon children on top of that. I mean, you have any thoughts about this and about feminism in general?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think the hypocrisy is just mind-boggling. It is. And I think it really is lost on a lot of them, because even like, I mean, you mentioned that, but I know recently there's been a lot of buzz even coming after practices like religious practices like circumcision, and it's just totally lost on them that they are pushing this on children without any, research, without any, measures of science that would say this would benefit them in any way. It's actually the contrary, right? And yet they are so quick to condemn practices that are either cultural, and again, FGM is not part of Islam, but even something like circumcision, just because it comes from a tradition that they want to erase, basically. So I do think it's very interesting how they can't see their own double standards. But yeah, as far as feminism, I mean, unfortunately, I think it's just a really confusing time for a lot of people, because that term has also been hijacked. And I think when I talk to a lot of the younger Muslim, girls, I think because of, their own lived experiences, dealing with different challenges and struggles, they kind of find a refuge in some of the talking points that are presented as feminist ideology. And they don't really bother to look at the history of it and to really examine what are the roots, what were the objectives of these people. They don't know, for example, that many of the founders of the movement were atheists, that they have absolutely no connection to any religious tradition, and that do push a very strong postmodern atheist worldview through this ideology. They don't know these things until you start to explain to them that, that's why, if you just look at how the initial movement may have started with some noble, objectives in terms of equal pay and, recognizing women as not being second-class citizens and wanting certain rights for women. But when you look at the different waves and iterations, you can objectively see that we completely went off of that mark. And now the entire, movement, I think, is defined by what they couch with very, sanitized language as being, women's rights and reproductive rights. But really, what is the crux of their agenda? It's abortion. It's things that are so destructive. And it's like, do you really want to identify with a movement and ideology that's what represents what the core of what they fight for women? Because in terms of the other objectives, I mean, we're still, from last I read, I mean, we're not at all, and there's still a disparity when it comes to income. There's still a lot of, other things that we haven't achieved despite our, call for freedom and this, that, or the other. And I remember, I don't know if you've heard of this paper that was written, I think it was published in 2009, by Yale, some researchers at Yale. It's called The Paradox of Declining Female Happiness. I really think it's an important paper for all women to read, especially Muslim women, because, again, so that we don't fall into these ideologies, and we really see just how disingenuous a lot of their claims are. But it's a 40-year research that shows that despite all of the advancements that feminism purports to have fought for women, that we're still reporting, so many women are not happy and they're miserable. So it's like, what's going on? So all of this, opening up society, sexual, the revolution, all of the things that women somehow, this liberates women, these things that they fought for. You would think that, that we would be on cloud nine, but no, most women are actually reporting that they're really dissatisfied in life across all economic background. I mean, socioeconomic backgrounds, culture, whether they're married or single, it didn't matter. It was all reporting this decline. So that's why it's a paradox, like what's going on. And they resolved that a couple of factors, that they could see were connected, or that we have a lack of, social cohesion amongst a lot of women. So they, the divide and conquer, I think, method, where women are just not coming together and support of one another like traditionally they used to. And that's actually working against us. And that's, I think, one of the most dangerous elements of feminism is it's so fake. It kind of creates this perception that we're all coming together for a common cause, but it's actually so divisive that even within their own ranks, I mean, you see a spectrum of different people. Some, there's just no, they're really not in it for good reasons or noble reasons, but they pretend that that's what their cause is. And then the pitting against, men and women, that's the other part of their ideology. Is so demonic, that why are we seen as enemies of one another? Why can't we have a complementary relationship? But they've forced this wedge. And so I find it so troubling that we have young Muslim women, especially, who, to me, it's like a cheap imitation, such a cheap imitation of what their own tradition has always stood for. If you want to really talk about rights and advancement of women, you would just need to study your faith well, and you would never need that label, right? You would never need to even look in that direction.
Right. Yeah, I think that it goes back to something you said earlier about understanding the philosophy that undergirds a lot of these movements, and if Muslims themselves really fully understood, then they won't easily be sort of captured by these things. And I think what happens is that instead of seeing the philosophy, they see for instance, a particular mission, right? Okay, well, so I say they have a mission and I agree with that mission, therefore I should embrace it, but not understanding that the people actually who start the mission, who run the mission, that they themselves have their own moral assumptions and they have their own political goals involved as well. You can say this about a lot of different things, right? But I think like equality itself is probably one of the biggest misnomers involved here, in that, okay, well, people have their different interpretations of it. It seemed to me like the trajectory of feminism was, okay, well, it started off with very noble goals. Okay, listen, that we should have the right to work, right? If you're saying that we're equal citizens, then we should have the right to vote, and then all of a sudden, and then move from there to almost like, okay, man worship, to, in the sense of that, okay, well, listen, there's not really much difference between us and men, and so there should be no reason for you to discriminate between, men and women, right? But now it sort of seemed to be moving back in the other direction of like, okay, well, female worship, woman worship, right? So in other words, so now a man who claims he's a woman, is a woman, and you are a bigot if you don't sort of affirm that particular man in his delusion, right? And that becomes what is considered to be the true expression of feminism today, right? At least with the more radical versions, the radical people who actually associate themselves with feminism. So
which is so ironic, right? Because it's like they're contributing to actually the erasure of women, while also simultaneously acting as though they're the greatest advocates of women's rights. Because if you're not even able to identify what a woman is, or you're participating in these delusions, then you are eventually cutting out the very people that you're supposed to be trying to advocate for. And that's what's happening with girls now. We have girls sports that are completely compromised, and all of these other things that have happened as a result of the insanity of not having I think, like you said, moral clarity, and also just a real framework that is based on objective truth and something that's real. These are just ideas that they come up with, and it's like, we all have to buy into them. But no, once you really do some critical thinking and you examine what their philosophies are, what their ideas are, then you realize, like, this doesn't make any sense. It's against fitra. There's nothing in here for us as Muslims anyway.
Right. And even the gays have problem with the transgenders, because it's like, being gay has everything, well, not everything, but a lot to do with an acknowledgement of biological reality. You say, so how can you be gay but believe that a man who says he's a woman, or a woman who says he's a man, is actually that thing, right?
Exactly.
Right. So
no, that's true. And that's why there's entire groups that speak out against it. Yeah, because it's you're right. It challenges their they believe very firmly that they that their attractions are based on these gender differences. And so to negate and the binary, or to say that there's no binary at all and there's no such thing as these things, these are all social constructs, then completely dismisses everything that they've been saying as well.
Right, exactly right. So and they've made it difficult for them. I feel like the transgenders especially have made it difficult for everyone else, and anyone who endorses those sort of beliefs. I organized a program some years ago in Atlanta, and at that particular conference, someone in the audience got on the microphone and said, "Oh, the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was a feminist." And then there's someone else, and the other sisters like, yeah, the Prophet was a feminist. And I responded to that by saying, in short, that this is blasphemous,
Right.
right? Right. And of course, a lot of people, some people there, they disagree with what I said, but I still hold that viewpoint, and of
Right.
course, not blasphemy, because typically when we say blasphemy, we're talking about something like an offense against God, right?
Right.
But to me, it's blasphemous towards the Prophet, Islam,
Sure.
because when you understand what feminism grows out of, and for instance, postmodern philosophy, and especially if
Mhm.
you think about Marxism,
Right.
um, these are all, or even capitalism as well. I don't like to call the prophet a capitalist either, right?
Right.
I believe that his teachings were much more
They transcended
capitalist
all of these
friendly,
things.
right? But I don't like to call him a capitalist, because both Marxism or socialism and capitalism together,
Mhm.
they are sort of dunyawi, right?
Mhm.
Sort of systems. The ideas about happiness can be created through wealth, right?
Right.
Right, the amassment of dunya, and the Prophet
Right.
ﷺ wasn't about the dunya, right? So,
Exactly. Contradicts everything he
yeah,
taught,
yeah,
100%.
yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah,
this just, I think, reveals our limitations
yeah,
in the modern world to try to really, to describe him in the way that
mm,
he's befitting to him. Because, yeah, to use those labels, I agree
mm,
100%. It's not
mm,
befitting. He
mhm,
he's above all of these
mhm,
movements and ideologies, and his views are
mm,
so way up, transcend all of it, that to use them to try
yeah.
to make some connection, I think, is just really flawed thinking. So I'm glad
Right,
you
right.
said
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, yeah, no,
Mhm.
I think that, Muslims, like Sheikh Hamza, one thing he said, that I remembered, it really stuck with me from some years ago. He says that if you don't philosophize, then others will philosophize for
That's it
you,
for you.
right?
Exactly.
So, and I think this is the case, right? That especially Sunni Muslims for many centuries have been averse to philosophy to begin with.
Right.
And I think that perhaps we struggle a little bit more. Well, I really, again, I can't really say that, more than Shia or others, right? But it seems that we do have struggled with this, that,
Mm.
okay, that they're, that we buy into someone else's philosophy, not realizing it is someone else's philosophy,
Right.
thinking that it's an objective standard for judging the goodness or the morality of something,
Right.
right? And then we critique everything utilizing those standards, including the
Mm.
Quran, including Islam, right?
Uh-huh.
Right.
Mm.
And we never turn it back the other way and say, okay, well, no, no, no. There's a Quranic moral standard. There's
Right.
a moral standard from the Sunnah, right? And we can utilize that particular lens to also critique this particular system or this particular philosophy,
Right.
but just that we need more Muslims to actually learn it in
Right.
order to do so. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. That's a very powerful
Mm,
point, and I think
mm,
you're right. I mean, I also feel like there's
mm,
insecurity when we do this as well. When we try
mm,
to use other people's terminologies, I
mm,
feel like it's a deep insecurity.
mm,
It's like, what are we? Either we're ignorant and we don't
mm,
know, or there's a
mm,
sense of like, because it's newer, it's more relevant. That somehow, these older terms are not as sophisticated. So
mhm,
I'd rather use these labels and these terms, and then
mhm,
in a way of kind of establishing,
mhm.
some sort of I don't know, relevance, but I feel like it comes from insecurity too.
Yeah,
uh,
right, right. No, I agree. I agree. Well, why don't you speak a little bit about Muslims for was it for Muslims? Was it your website? It was called
oh yeah,
uh
that we had started. Yeah, Dr.
it was
Nafisa.
mental health for
Yeah.
Muslims.com, right? Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. So yeah, I was invited by Dr. Nafisa to start something because she had made some inroads,
Mhm,
with, I mean, obviously
mhm,
she is a practicing clinical
mhm,
psychologist, but I think
mhm,
she was trying to make some inroads into the Muslim community. And at that time, this was back in 2009, 2010, there was still a deep stigma
mhm,
with the term mental health and getting mental health services within the community. So she felt like it was really hard. Like people just don't want to either admit that they have problems, or they feel that there's, going to be some repercussions of getting involved in anything related to mental health. So they didn't really, she didn't feel like she could open up, but she knew that I had sort of had a reputation in the community of helping people individually, just with spiritual counseling, because of the absence of a lot of these. Now we have centers and we have places for people to go, but as you know, being in the role of a teacher, that oftentimes community members will just come to whoever is teaching and then tell you all their problems, whether it's marital or individual. So having been serving in the community as a teacher, I think people just came and asked me to help them with their marriage problems or their family problems. So I had kind of done that for a while, and so she said, why don't we join forces where we can at least remove some of these stigmas and help people get real help, because the things that we were dealing with were real. I mean, we had substance abuse issues, we had domestic violence issues, we had addictions to pornography, we had like real things that were you can do so much, but if people some people they actually need proper services. So it was kind of an opportunity for us to collaborate, write articles on different topics, and then give guidance to resources for people that there are pathways to getting help without having to be public about whatever you're going through. So just providing that. So the website started off with that, and then alhamdulillah kind of grew from there. And I mean, in the past 15 or 14 years now, it's definitely, the landscape has completely altered. We see so many more people going into the field of mental health, which is I mean, as even though I am a mental health advocate, I do with the caveat say that I think we have to have an anchor to our tradition, because Western mental health, as you know, is very, again, secular. It's not based in any tradition. And there's definitely problems that that people who go too far down that path will have when it comes to their own faith and practicing their faith. So I'm always, it's a bit of a, I try to cautiously approach the topic of mental health and say, as long as the practitioners are Muslim and they actually know their faith. So it's not just that they have a Muslim name, because I've heard some pretty terrible stories about people who are in that field who actually give really terrible advice, horrible advice, break up families. And so we have to be very careful about how I think we talk about mental health in this day and age.
I definitely think that for Muslims, Muslims are still sort of trying to find their, I guess you'd say, their center when it comes to like what, I guess you'd say Muslim psychology or Islamic psychology actually really looks like. I recall a few years ago, I think it was a situation in Texas. There was two young boys, they killed their families. Then they committed suicide, and they sort of posted this sort of manifesto online prior to doing it. And the reaction of the community was largely, from what I could see, it was, okay, well, if you give your khutbah tomorrow, if you're going to speak about the situation, do not quote a hadith about suicide. And I really felt that was wrong.
Right.
I mean, why would you censor the voice of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right?
Right.
And of course, I mean, I guess maybe one concern was that, okay, well, we're going to demonize the family and the boys in particular themselves, right?
Right.
But at the same time, when people do things that are horrendous, right? A certain amount of demonization is deserved, especially when you actually look at the manifesto they wrote. They were really clear about, like, they understood what they were doing, right? It's very clear when you read the right, exactly. And I just felt that, okay, that was really, really bad advice given to the community, that we should censor the voice of the Prophet about suicide. I mean, it's not as if, like, listen, they've already committed suicide. Do we think that, quoting the Prophet's statements about suicide is going to make somebody commit suicide?
Right.
No, it's the opposite, right? Because he's telling people, like, you kill yourself, you're going to go to hell forever, and things like that. You're going to punish yourself over and over and over. To me, it sounds like it would disincentivize it, right? Because that particular family is already gone. Those boys have already made the decision, right? So we don't want it to happen again in the future. So to me, it would seem that that would be the perfect opportunity to talk about, the problems with suicide, and that you should not kill yourself, right? So like I said, I think that Muslims still are trying to find their center when it comes to the matter of what a real sort of Islamic psychology should look like. So some mistakes have been made so far. And of course, we know we have Tasawwuf, and we have our own teachings along those lines as well. And I want you use the term spiritual counseling.
Right.
How do you differentiate that from regular mental health sort of intervention, I guess you would say.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you for just bringing up this incident, because I think it is important to also mention that how we react to these situations in the community have to be collaborative. You know, when we separate and divide, like, oh, if you're not in the world of mental health therapy, I mean, excuse me, mental health, then you have no part of the conversation. You shouldn't say anything, and we dictate to you. I think doesn't work. Just like, I mean, we also need religious leaders to to work with people in the field, right? To say, how can we best address these types of issues to prevent, greater social harm? So I feel like we need to really come together. But sometimes you get these reactionary voices that chime in, and then, like you said, they suppress certain voices or try to, lead in a way that's very dismissive. And I don't think that's helpful at all. So I appreciate your call that no, we need to have some balance, when we react to these things, and never think that that leaving the Prophet ﷺ's words or the Quran would ever be beneficial to our community, right? They have to be the most prominent of voices, and then we can add in whatever we need to. But I agree 100% with that. As far as spiritual counseling, what I do is I usually let people know that I mean, I did a minor. I was planning to, do psychology, but I changed in for my BA. So I do have some background, in psychology, sociology. So, but I try not to really use those. I mean, I because I'm not qualified, I just make it very clear to people that what I do is really, listen and try to offer counsel from the perspective of, what's missing for you spiritually. So if there's deficiencies, in terms of your practice or understanding, maybe there's sometimes people have just really flawed understanding of aqidah, like basic things, how the world works, their relationship with Allah, and just things that are that if you studied, you would have a better understanding of. But that plays on their interpretation of events in their life, of things that are happening to them. A good example, for example, is istikhara. I've talked to several people that they make a decision because they did their istikhara prayer, and then the outcome doesn't pan out for what they wanted. So that really weighs on their relationship with God, because they feel like, well, I did the right thing. It's very formulaic. I did this, so I expected this outcome. And then they start to really have doubt about, the validity of everything, not just the istikhara prayer. So just helping them understand that, well, wait a second, where in the dua of istikhara does it say that what you get, or what you're asking for is going to be exactly what you're going to receive? What is the actual dua? If you look at the words, it's asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for khair. And who's to say that going through tribulation and difficulty is not a path of khair, right? So once you just give those types of perspectives, then people are like, oh, okay, I didn't understand it that way. So I feel like, dispelling any, misunderstandings about things like prayer or dua, or just even helping to, solidify people's relationship with their spiritual practice is a form of nasiha, deen nasiha. This is all it is. And it's really listening and trying to validate people's feelings, and then offer inshallah advice that's hopefully from the Quran and Sunnah, and not from my opinions. I try not to, my opinion doesn't matter at all. It's just setting the truth forward.
Yeah, it's sort of like what I would say about certain things is that hada mujarrab, this is something that has been tried and tested, and so it works. That's right. So yeah, you bring to mind again back to old memories too, when I was in the prison. And sometimes, well, quite often, you will find one of the Muslim brothers, he's actually in what we call the hole, or so the restricted housing unit. Something happened on the block, maybe there's a fight or something, so they grab somebody, they lock him up, and restrict his movement a little bit more. Wow. And so, and I had the duty to sort of go around and to visit the infirmary, and then also the restricted housing unit, a certain number of times per week. So I remember sometimes brothers would say, okay, well, and I would ask them, okay, why are you here? And they said, well, I don't know. right? And
Mm.
they were really suffering. They understand like
Wow.
what was going on, why they punished me in this way,
Mm.
and so often when I would tell them, I said, well, think about it, and maybe there's something that you've done and you haven't made Toba from. And
Mhm.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now is giving you the opportunity to do that. Think about that, because you may think about, okay, I've been
Exactly.
done an injustice, but maybe you did some injustice to someone else before, right? And
Exactly.
so, yeah, and that usually that often would help them, right, to think about it like that, and
Absolutely. Well, that's
so
part of, the modern age. It's so sad is that people are so isolated that they don't have, that type of feedback to really evaluate things, from a objective lens or perspective, because we've just cut everybody off. And so then you're in your own head. And as that's where waswasa begins. And so you don't have, a perspective. I mean, that's such an important reminder, that it may not be what's happening now, but can you think back about a time that maybe you did something
yeah.
that you may be paying for right now, and it's like, oh, okay. So yeah,
Yeah,
those
yeah,
are definitely ways that we can offer, and I think people do benefit tremendously from
yeah.
that type of advice.
Yeah,
Alhamdulillah.
yeah. One more story. I think it'll be really, you find it funny too. This is another
Yeah.
story from prison too. So at the prison where I worked,
Mhm.
they had about 35 lifers, right? In Pennsylvania, life
Wow.
is like natural life, right? So, so it was a medium security prison. So one of
Mm,
the brothers who used to help me out, he was a lifer, and he used to be part of the junior black mafia, yeah, in
mm,
Philadelphia. So he had been in prison for a few decades around this time. He's 30 years he had been in prison, and
mm.
so he came to my office one day. He was really like just really frustrated because he wanted to go home. He wanted to get out of prison. But he
Sure.
knew he knew what was going to happen, and he was complaining about it. And he said to me, he said to me, he said, I've killed people before, but I didn't kill this guy that they put me in prison for.
Yeah, Allah. Oh my, that's an admission,
Yeah,
boy.
yeah, yeah. So, but I said to myself, maybe that's why Allah wants you here, because of the people you did kill.
Subhanallah.
You shouldn't have killed, right? So, and he's like,
Allah.
yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right, brother Imam, right?
Alhamdulillah, you helped him to, yeah,
So,
make the connection. Wow,
yeah.
subhanallah.
Yeah, well,
Amazing.
so a few more questions before you go. We've kind of
Sure,
gone
no,
on a
of
little bit
course.
longer than originally I expected, but alhamdulillah, it's all good, I think.
Alhamdulillah, it's
Um,
an honor.
do you have any books? Have you written any books or anything, any
Mm.
articles that people probably might find useful?
You know what? I
Mhm.
I think I forgot to bring it, but I wrote a children's book. It's just
Okay.
it's called Clear the Path, a rhyme book on manners for little Muslims.
Mhm.
And this came when my kids were younger. I lived in Southern California, so alhamdulillah, a couple of friends and I, we started a Muslim co-op, and we ended up working, throughout the week with these little kids and mashallah at the masjid consistently, and we just were singing a lot, and we were, just doing a lot of different things. So I said, the kids respond to rhyme, and these are topics that all parents want their kids to know, just basic etiquette. So it's all from the Sunnah. I've paired the lyrics up with different aspects of the Prophet ﷺ's life. And then there's a guide at the back of the book that also is for teachers and resources with hadith that complement the lyrics. And it's basically, on visiting, for example, people, how you visit when you, are praying, the adab of prayer, but the adab of gift giving, or just sharing, your food. So there's different sort of, aspects of just basic etiquettes that we're teaching the kids, but through rhyme. And there's also there's not cartoons. What are they called? The illustrations are in a comic format, so it's like a
Okay.
comic illustrated
Mhm.
book with rhymes, ideal for preschoolers and young elementary school students. Alhamdulillah.
Is available on Amazon and other, or
Yeah,
perhaps your website, right?
alhamdulillah.
Okay. Okay, it's
It
great.
is, and it's terrible.
So
I'm
what
terrible at
was it
marketing, so
called
I
again?
always forget.
Was it
Oh,
again? Was it called again?
yeah, it's called
It's
Clear the Path.
Clear the Path. Okay, Clear
Yeah,
the Path, inshallah.
yeah, but
And
I'm like I actually forget that I even wrote that book because I'm really bad at marketing. I have very little business sense, so
yeah. Well, hopefully this will help a little bit, inshallah.
I'm
Once
just like,
people see it,
okay,
inshallah. Okay.
then.
Yeah. Is there anyone you know of or know who you think others should know more about? Someone
Mm.
from the past, or someone from the the present, someone who perhaps had a major influence on your life and the path you've taken?
Oh gosh. That's such a, you know what? I remember seeing this question going, "Oh, how can I answer this?"
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. I
It
think
could be more than one person. It doesn't have to just be one person, right? It could
well,
be,
mashallah, I mentioned
yeah.
Shaykh Hamza and
Okay.
the impact that he's had on my life, and there's just so many stories of things that
Mhm.
that he's been a part of. But I think one of the teachers that he exposed us to that to this day has made an impact on my life would be Sidi Ahmed Zarruq,
Mm.
rahimahullah. And I love teaching people about his work. We read the the Foundations of the Spiritual Path
Mhm.
as an amazing text, and I feel like everybody really should read that with their kids. Just read
Yeah.
that text because it's so
Mhm.
informative and it really helps to just
Mhm.
shape and help Muslims with their faith identity. So I feel like his works and his story, being raised by his grandmother, just I don't know, there's just something I feel very connected about his story. And
Mhm.
maybe it's also because, excuse me, we talked about Islamic psychology. I feel like his insights into just the human condition and the way that we operate are just so ahead of their time. And when you read the way that he presents his nasiha, it just hits the heart. I remember one of the quotes that it's in the translation of the Purification of the Heart. Shaykh Hamza
Mhm.
mentions it. It's a quote from him. He says, this is a quote from Sidi Ahmed Zarruq: "Do not trust anyone with matters related to your religion, your family, or your wealth until you have tested him at least 1,000 times." And so when I remember reading that going, subhanallah, I mean, this was in the 9th century that he's
Mhm.
saying this. So to
Yes.
me, I'm just like, subhanallah, because, we have this idea when we reminisce or, look back on Islam historically, we always
Mhm.
romanticize it as everybody was just, they were all saints, walking around.
Mhm.
So for him to have said that in his time, just, I think, speaks volumes about these are, perpetual problems we've had,
Mhm.
human beings, in terms of diseases of the heart and
Mhm.
relationships and being tested by people.
Mhm.
But I really feel like in this day and age, when people have they don't really have those guardrails in terms or boundaries set in place in terms
Mhm.
of relationships. I feel like it's really sound advice because you see this
Yes.
oversharing,
Exactly.
right?
Mhm.
On the internet is now a horrible,
Mhm.
place where you can see people completely oversharing. I mean, now
Mhm.
someone made a post the other day, and I was really disturbed by it. But she was just upset, reacting to a trend that's now, I think, on TikTok or whatever, of Muslim married couples, talking now openly about their private,
Mm.
relationship.
Mm.
And
Mm.
she's like, "What's happening? Like, you have
Yes. Yeah.
people.
Mhm.
What is
Mhm.
happening, right?"
Yes. Right.
So it's
Yes.
very
Yeah.
concerning
Mhm.
how we're not guarded anymore about our, what's the most sacred, to us
Yes.
in terms of
Right.
our family
Exactly.
life, and people just feel the need to talk. So I think a quote like that just really resonates with me. Like, yeah, we have to be very
Mhm.
careful not to entrust some of the most intimate
Mhm.
details of our lives, even past things. Like, people will just talk about their
Yes.
sinful behavior, and I'm like,
Mhm.
what? That
Mhm.
can be weaponized. It can be used against you. It can, harm you. Don't share those things. We're not supposed to share those things. But you see,
Mhm.
I think so.
Mhm.
Anyway, but he would be definitely someone that I would suggest that
Yeah,
people.
mashallah, yeah, great examples, and it's especially in light of scandals we've seen recent years, as well, right? So, may
Absolutely.
Allah protect us from all those things, and but
Mean,
one final question, it's an easy
yeah.
one.
Okay.
How can someone follow your work?
Subhanallah. First of all, I don't, Sheikh Hamza's words always resonates with, like, about warning people about followers,
Yeah.
where he says that the person who had the most followers, or the one who had the most followers, is Iblis. So no one really needs to follow me, especially when they have, mashallah, teachers like yourself.
Yeah.
But if you're interested in anything that I do, I am on social media. I'm
Mhm.
much more quiet now than I was in the past. I used
Mhm.
to write long form posts. I don't even know how I used to do that before. But I was pre-COVID, but I wrote paragraphs and paragraphs. So
Mm.
I do have that on Facebook, and then on Instagram, I like to do infographics, and those are just a fun way of kind of taking modern frameworks and ideas
Mhm.
and not spinning it, but really reminding people that none of these things are new. There's a lot of ideas that have emerged in the past century or so, and people get very impressed by them. But then once you start to realize, like, actually, these are wisdoms that our tradition has had for centuries, and you just didn't know it. But here are, teachers like Sidi Ahmed Zaruq and others who, if you learn from, you won't be as impressed by, new age spirituality or pop psychology or all these things. So I try to use infographics to kind of relay that message. But alhamdulillah, that's on. So the handle is the same on Facebook. And then and I say this really, Dr. Abdullah, sincerely, you are one of the few people that I look forward to and I follow on Twitter, because I love your unapologetic, you're just so raw and real, and you keep things real. And I so appreciate that about you. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. May Allah protect and preserve and increase you.
Ameen. And also, I would say that people can follow you at HosaiMojaddidi.com. Yes, there's our website.
Yes. Although, subhanAllah, I don't know if you have, do you have your own website, Dr. Abdullah?
Yes, I do.
You do?
I do. Yeah.
So I'm terrible at checking it. And, I have a form there, and I checked it recently. Like, oh my God, all these people have been messaging. So to anyone who's watching, if you've messaged me there, I'm sorry. It's so hard to keep up. There's just too many streams of
I know,
correspondence now. So
well, inshallah, Ustadha Hosai, has really, really been a pleasure. Really enjoyed this conversation. Went on longer than I expected. That's because I think it's been a good conversation. And but alhamdulillah, looking forward to seeing you on campus, and of course, right in other places, inshallah, around the Bay. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and protect you and your family as well.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such an honor again. Jazakumullah khairan.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and support. Check the links in the description below to keep up with our work. Thank you.